Greetings to all C3RF members and friends throughout the nation and indeed around the world as we welcome a very special guest to this edition of In Hot. We are very fortunate to have with us today Bruce Pardy, the Executive Director of Rights Probe and Professor of Law at Queen's University. Professor Pardy has taught at law schools in Canada, the United States, and New Zealand, and has spearheaded resistance to and ultimate repeal of the Law Society of Ontario's Statement of Principles policy that required Ontario lawyers to attest to their ideological purity to maintain their license to practice. He has written on a wide range of subjects at the front lines of the culture war inside the law, including human rights and freedoms, free speech, and the rule of law. He swam against the current in 2020 when he warned of the adverse impacts of COVID lockdowns and was one of the authors of the 3 North Declaration, a call to arms to protect civil liberties from COVID irrationality and overreach. More recently, Professor Pardy has stepped boldly into the middle of the Alberta separation debate by proffering 13 articles of freedom that would form the basis of a new Albertan constitution. A constitution that would operate at odds with a Canadian ship of state that is, more than arguably, sailing towards a destination devoid of civil liberties and full of Chinese-style surveillance and social credit systems. Bruce, can we begin by, thanks very much for joining us in Hot today, Bruce. It's a real honor and pleasure to have you. I'd like to begin by discussing just what the heck is going on in Canada as it seems to ape other Western jurisdictions with a bevy of laws. I'm including here Bill C8, 9, 22, 34, 36, all of these under the pretext of national security and child safety. What is your cut on this fire hose of legislation that's coming down the pike to take away our freedoms?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Russ. It's great to be with you.
Yeah.
It's a great question. It's the question, right? It is the question. It's the question that a lot of people are trying to get their heads around. Why are governments doing this to us? And all the bills that you just cited, the federal government, I mean, they have a real package right now of coming down hard on our ability to communicate through the internet, to express our feelings, to do all kinds of things. It's all part of a package. And different people have offered different theories about what is going on. And there's a whole long list of them. And a lot of them have validity. I mean, just to cite just a few examples. I mean, people say it's a case of having, chosen bad leaders or entered into an era of dishonor amongst the political class, corruption. We have globalism, Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, the New World Order, and so on. The influence of the World Economic Forum and the UN and the WHO and foreign influence and the rise of critical theory and feminism and wokeism, the death of God, the declining birth rate, and more, like all kinds of things. But not to say that there isn't validity to these ideas, but my diagnosis is simple. I like to ask this question. Why are our own governments, both federal and provincial and municipal, doing this? And my answer is because they can.
Okay.
Now, I don't mean to be facetious. I mean, literally, they are doing this because our system of government allows them to do this. We think we live in a system of restraints, like checks and balances, charter rights. You cited the charter. Judicial oversight, separation of powers. We have all of these principles, ideas embedded somewhere in our Constitution, or so we think. But it turns out that those limitations, those restraints, are more apparent than real. And the powers that be inside the state, and when I say the state, I mean all the bits of the state together, right? You have the legislatures, parliament, and provincial legislatures. You have the executive branch, all the bits, the agencies, the ministries, the cabinet, all the stuff of the state, and we have the courts. All of those things are part of the state. So the state all together can do anything it wants. And now the gloves are off and they are doing anything they want. And so I trace this back to a flaw in the way that we are governed. All those other theories have validity. I mean, those are all problems. They're all, if you like, part of the cause of where we've arrived. But the basic problem for me is our system has been put together so that the state can do these things. And if they can do it, they will do it.
Obviously. And we're seeing them do it right now. So I can see your point there where, the checks and balances are basically, as written down on a piece of paper, subject to interpretation. And they can be seen as paper tigers.
That's right.
I want to go a little bit deeper into this, and I want to get your cut on this because I'm looking at Freedom Convoy 2022.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of court cases on the relevance of the invocation of the Emergencies Act by the federal government. There was two court cases. There was one court case where the protesters won the case on, by virtue of the fact that their charter rights had been abused, specifically Section 8, I believe, search and seizure. And then we had an appeal, and that appeal unanimously held up the original court's decision. And now let's take a look at Bill C-22, where basically the government can come in and take your metadata, your social media metadata, no warrants. It can store it for up to a year. Basically, I'm just a layman here, but I'm looking at looks to me like they're searching and seizing my personal property. So how can a government go through two court cases, be given a whack in the behind for being bad, and then go around and legislate the same abuse all over again? Is that just dumb, or is that just how confident and arrogant they are?
Well, it's a good question. So let's just have a look for a moment at that case, decided now twice, as you described.
Yeah,
that case was a challenge to the government's invocation of the Emergencies Act, and what the federal court said and what the Court of Appeal upheld was the conclusion that the Emergency Act was not properly invoked on its own terms. That is, the Emergencies Act sets out certain thresholds for it to be, they have to be met before it can be used.
Yeah.
And the court quite properly, these are good decisions, the court quite properly looked at the words in the statute and said, are those thresholds met in this situation? And concluded that they weren't. But the point of this is that part of the decision was based upon the act itself. That has nothing to do with the Constitution, nothing to do with the Charter. It is a statutory conclusion, quite properly put. But here's the thing. Because it's a conclusion on the wording of the statute, that means that there's no constitutional conclusion in that respect. And therefore, if the government wanted to go back and say, you know what, this Emergencies Act didn't work the way we wanted it to, we're going to amend the act. We're going to amend the thresholds so that in a future situation like this last one, this statute will allow us to use it. And so this conclusion, although it declared quite properly that the federal government's invocation of the act was improper in this case based upon the statute, that does not mean that we cannot get an amended version of the statute that could not be used in a future situation that's very much the same. Okay? But now, there was a charter angle to this. The charter angle was that once the act was invoked, the government promulgated two regulations under the act. One was to assist with the situation on the ground, and the other one was to freeze bank accounts.
Yeah.
And the court said that both of those things were contrary to the charter. And that's where the section 8 search and seizure thing came in. They said you didn't follow a proper process before you froze bank accounts, and that was contrary to the charter. That's good. It's a good conclusion, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the government can't go ahead and enact legislation to provide for the kind of thing that they now have, they're now trying to do, as you described. There's no guarantee at all that the court will strike that down, because it's a very different process. The kind of things that the government wants to collect now, metadata, is not quite the same thing as shutting down your personal bank account or gathering the information to do that. So it's very much up in the air. The problem is, of course, that this charter of ours, since its inception, has been subject by definition to the interpretation of the courts. And sometimes that interpretation goes well, as it did in these two cases, but very often it does not. And there have been lots of cases, especially during COVID, where the court said, well, the charter says this, but that doesn't mean that, and therefore, yes, you can be locked down. Yes, you can be prevented from gathering in church parking lots. Yes, you can have vaccine passports and so on. And so, in all those circumstances, the charter did very little. So it is not the kind of thing that one can count on to withstand all of this government encroachment upon what we should ideally have as our own personal matters.
Indeed, it certainly seems to be the case that the charter is not winning out in these kinds of arguments. I'm seeing a kind of a two-track charter or constitution here. I'm seeing on one hand, we've got the old colonial application of law through peace, order, and good government. That's been with the country well before Confederation. And then we've got the charter that I thought was supposed to put a check and balance on, the government's ability to run roughshod over peace, order, and good government. But obviously, as you say, it can be interpreted by the courts anyway. And I'm seeing that I don't know if you saw our new Governor General's acceptance speech about 2 weeks ago, but in it she made a point that our Constitution, she's talking about solving differences in society, and she said that the people in Canada have their rights, they have their fundamental rights subject to subject to limitations made necessary by the maintenance of, I think her words were, peaceful democracy. So forget about Section 1 of the Charter, the limitations clause that calls for the need to demonstrably justify limitations on your fundamental rights. And now we're into a stage. I didn't believe what I was hearing, but it looks like she's taken the side of peace, order, and good government. The heck with the Charter. And she's a former Supreme Court justice. Yep. So I'm thinking, what does this say about the future of our Canadian governments under Prime Minister Carney and his selected Governor General, Louis Arbour? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, you're putting your finger on one of the incoherencies that we suffer from. And so let me try this. During COVID, a lot of us were frustrated that objections to many of these COVID rules were being let through. The courts were not upholding charter rights. They were saying, no problem. It's an emergency. It's a kind of situation where the government has the ability to either these are not violations of charter rights at all, or they are reasonable limits under Section 1. Okay. And our frustration there comes from the fact that the courts are not rigorously enforcing charter rights in the sense that they are allowing the governments to do what they want to do. Okay.
Yes.
That's one problem. Here's the opposite problem. A lot of us also complain about the fact that we are now into an era of judicial supremacy, wherein the courts can overrule what governments do. And so to just take one random example, the Ford government proposed to eliminate bike lanes off some major thoroughfares, and somebody objected to that and went to a court, and the court said, sorry, you can't do that. That's a violation of Section 7. Okay. And we said, well, but the government is elected. They have the democratic legitimacy to make rules about what the road looks like. The court is now interfering. Now, we notice a contradiction, though. In the first situation, we wanted the court to interfere And in the second situation, we were outraged that the court did interfere. Okay, so this is partly on us. We are being inconsistent with what we want. Like, do we want legislative supremacy and leave the courts out of it? Okay, if so, then then the government can make the rules about the bike lanes, but it also means it can make rules about COVID. But when COVID comes along, we want the court to come along and say, no, you can't do that because it says so in the charter. Okay, and that didn't happen largely. Okay, so my point is, we don't know what we want. What we ought to want is a different system of government wherein legislatures and governments and courts cannot interfere in things. In other words, we want a situation where the COVID rules are, in fact, out of the boundary of what governments are allowed to do. But if we rely on courts to enforce rights to get there, our experience has been that doesn't work. So the question remains, how can we establish a system of government where individuals actually have control over their own lives in a way that is not subject to the judgment and discretion of legislatures, governments, or courts? Because as a group, they are mostly all on the same page. They all agree with the central proposition that the role of government is to manage society. And if that management occasionally requires your individual interest to be set aside, well, then so be it. That will not do.
That certainly seems to be the place where we're headed. And I think we can say what you're telling me is that what we're lacking here is public input, is the input of the person. The person is being just steamrolled by these huge governmental and judicial authorities, made worse by the fact that, and this is crazy, that the same authorities that govern us are the ones at the very pinnacle of political power that are selecting the judges.
Yes, quite right.
Quite right. So we've got a double whammy here, a democratic deficit based on the fact that how can a Joe Blow, individual like you or I, have basically any input into a system that is just so rigged against them? It's just crazy.
Here's another complication. Another complication in thinking this through. So there is a real tension between democracy on the one hand as an idea and individual autonomy on the other, right? So we often think of a free nation as consisting of one that has real, genuine democratic input. The people actually select the government, and the government abides by what the people want it to do. Okay, and that's good. It's a value. It's better to have democracy than the reverse. But on the other hand, democracy is also a threat to individual rights. So let's just consider this. Let's say, I don't know if this is true, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that during COVID, the public was wrapped up into a COVID frenzy. And if you'd asked them, if you'd actually taken a poll or even a vote amongst the public about what they thought should be the case during COVID, about whether we should have lockdowns and masking rules and vaccine mandates and so on, the majority of people might have said yes. Okay, that's democracy. But that means that all the individuals who said, no, I won't do that, would have been subject to the will of the majority, which is the reason to have rights in the first place. The reason to have rights is to be able to push against the majority who say, you will do this. The individual's got to be able to say, no, I won't. Right? And so even in a democratic system, I'm not saying that we have a very workable democracy right now, but even if you had one, that wouldn't be enough, because you also need areas in which individuals are able to stand back and say, I don't care what the rest of you want me to do. It's my business. I will decide for myself. And so we're a long, long way from that.
No, we sure are. And it seems to be that gap is becoming wider and wider with every passing bill and every passing day. I wonder if just this kind of segue into the next part of this interview in the Alberta situation.
Right.
I'd like to know, we talk about, we see Alberta the talk about Alberta is they want to have the access to the resources. They want to keep some of their own money. It seems to be an economic argument, but I'm wondering what you think about how much of this personal freedom stuff is pushing this Alberta separation movement along. Is it a big factor, or is it? What do you think?
I think it's a big factor for a lot of people, but I'm not sure it's the one that is going to motivate an awful lot of the middle group. I've been thinking of the Alberta population as though it's divided into three, right? So I don't know what the exact numbers are, but let's say that there's about a third that are deeply committed to independence. And there's a third that is definitely against it. And I don't think you're going to change the views of any of those people. But
Yeah,
there's a middle third that is not sure. I think a lot of those people are unhappy with the status quo. They're unhappy with Ottawa. They're unhappy with the situation in this country. But I'm not sure that they're convinced that leaving the country is the right remedy yet. And that middle third is the one that's going to determine the outcome here.
yeah,
I think amongst that third, I think the economic arguments are the ones that they're listening to right now. I think that's unfortunate because the economic arguments, as valid as they are really not the kind of thing that a societal transformation needs to rest on. I mean, I think it has to be about freedoms and rights, liberties that you're not being accorded by your governments, both federal and provincial. My biggest concern about Alberta independence is that a lot of Albertans in this middle group may essentially want things to remain as they are without Ottawa. As in, let's get rid of the federal interference, get rid of the equalization, let's get rid of federal obstacles to resource development, all fair and good. But
yeah.
otherwise, let's just carry on the way we are. We don't want change. We want a full service welfare state. We want the provincial government to take over all the federal functions, and let's just carry on. If that is the case, then for my money, I don't know why they would bother. I mean, that's not, who cares? That is not changing the situation that you have that you recognize is no good, that will not do. And so if this is all about the economics of the thing, number one, it might not happen, and number two, it doesn't really matter anyway.
Yeah. No, I think what you're talking about there is there really does need to be more than just the economics involved. I think the willingness or the desire to live somewhere where you're comfortable, where people share your values, and amongst those values, in our Western democracies, it used to be things like personal freedom. It used to be things like live and let live, golden rule, all those things that made Western society so great. Now you're talking about a third, and a third.
Right.
And we talked before about democracies can be bad because if you scare a people bad enough, the vast majority will be scared to the point where they'll make irrational decisions, as we saw during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And underlying all of that is something called behavioral modification.
Yes.
It's something I've been writing on over the last little while. And over the course, I'd say since the onset of the Obama years, we've really seen behavioral modification blossom as a science at the political levels. And we even have in Canada, I think they have a whole institution, a whole agency, a bureaucracy set up to sort out how best to influence public opinion.
Right.
So with having said that, I think how do you win that? How do you win that fight if you're talking about a system where take a look at the polling industry. In the polling industry, I can tell you what the poll's going to say even before the poll comes out, because all the polls are just bobbleheads who are ask questions that derive the appropriate answer that the government wants you to give. So how do you fight that type of thing in the battle for Alberta separation? How is that going to be addressed? Or will it be addressed?
It's going to be very difficult. Very difficult. I mean, these obstacles were going to be coming down the pike from the very beginning. And it's one of those things you have to expect. You have to be able to persuade your own people that the situation that they're in will not do. And if they are not convinced of that, because this behavior modification is working,
Yeah.
or because they've been influenced in a myriad of ways, and you can see all of this gathering steam now. All of the Federalist forces, who are ordinarily on completely different pages fighting against each other, now have common cause in Alberta to put this down. If you cannot persuade your own people to vote in favor of their own liberty at this kind of a moment, given all the history, all of the long history of attempts to reform a confederation, in all different kinds of ways, to reform equalization, to reform the Senate, to get resource development clear, all of those things. If the history of Alberta is not enough for Albertans to decide that it is proper now to decide to leave, if this behavior modification works to persuade them not to do that, well, then you get what you ask for. At some point, people have to think for themselves. If they can't, then they get what they deserve.
Yeah. And we can, you talk about reforms. I think I heard you say once before, maybe a little while ago, that, you can pressure the federal government. You can maybe do something with equalization around the edges, or you can have your own police force or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you don't change the structure, what's to say it's all going to come back on you, and it's going to be even worse when they reform it back to the way it was and beyond. So
that's right. Yeah. That's right. And so, if I may, that might be a good moment to describe one of the main features of this Alberta Constitution that I've put forward. So one of the key features of the Constitution that we have, and for that matter, of the constitutions that we're familiar with, around the world, including the American Constitution, those constitutions have a predominant feature, which is they essentially give governments, and by governments I mean the whole thing. I should call it the state again. I'm including the federal government and provincial government. I'm including the legislatures of those states. I'm including the executive branches, all the ministries and agencies and so on, and the courts. This is all part of the state. These constitutions give the state as a whole unlimited power, unlimited jurisdictional subject matter power. They can make rules about anything. And then, what do? Then they try or claim to make exceptions to that unlimited power, right? The government the federal government can do this, provincial government can do that, but you can't, for example, infringe freedom of speech. That's an exception. It's a charter right. Okay? You can do anything except is the structure of our Constitution. All powerful except. That won't do, because the state is policing itself, and as often as not, the checks and balances that go on inside the state are allowing it to go ahead and do these things. Okay, so what do? You flip that architecture. You flip the default. Now, the new one goes like this: the state can do nothing. It has power to do nothing.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
And then we say except. Okay, powerless, except. Now we have a different choice to make. What are the exceptions? Like, what do we want the state to do? There are some things we want the state to do, because otherwise there'd be no point in having one. What kinds of things is it essential that the state actually do? Well, I've got a very short list. It's essentially three things. The first one is, well, you need the state to keep the peace. Like, you don't want people fighting in the streets. You want to have a police force. You don't want people to be able to assault each other or take their stuff or invade their land. You want the state to keep the peace. Number two, You want to be able to resolve disputes when you have disputes with your neighbor, like, you put the fence on my property. You don't want to fight about that. You want to have a place to go to resolve that dispute. You want to have a court. Okay, so police and courts. And the third one, you want your state to protect you from invasions from the outside, right? You want a military and you want borders. You don't want everybody to come in willy-nilly. You want immigration control and so on. So those are the three things: keep the peace, resolve disputes, and protect the country. Okay,
Yeah.
and very little else.
So what I see you professing here, Professor, is a move away from something called positive freedom, which is the freedom that gives you things so that you can be free to do this or free to do that. Moving towards a state of negative freedom, where basically the state just gets out of the way. The state's not, people are allowed to pursue their own life's dreams and their own happiness as they see fit.
That is correct. That is correct. Yes.
That move from positive to negative freedom, that's a big move. And
it's a big move. And in fact, let's go further. I mean, that is true. So a lot of our charter rights, the ones that people are most familiar with, were conceived as negative rights, right? The right to be left alone with respect to your speech and religion and association and so on, right? And positive rights, the idea of positive rights has crept in, as in, no, I'm entitled to be provided with this. Okay, so we do away with that, first of all, for sure. But we also go further, which is what we've now done is we have taken away the ability of the state to take control over the general welfare, that is, the common good, the public interest. Under this model, the state has no mandate to provide for the common good. Only in those exceptional situations. Keep the peace.
Enumerated powers,
right? Otherwise, you cannot make rules and policies for the general welfare. You would have no power to make COVID rules because it's outside of the exceptions. This is a difficult thing for people to get their heads around because it's not the system they're used to. The system that we're used to embeds this idea so deeply that people don't even think about it. Of course, the government has the job of looking out for the general welfare. It does right now. That's the thing that has to end, because that is the basis upon which the government is doing all these things that you described on the opening, which is all of these bills that the federal government is enacting is based upon the proposition. The government has the responsibility and the right to look out for the general welfare. That idea has to go.
That is so true. I mean, and people have been ingrained in this feeling, this atmosphere of cocooning, where the state is going to take care of you from cradle to grave. It's a very, very strong feeling in Canada. But my own feelings on the charter have changed. I must say that when I look at the charter, I home in on the fundamental rights, and I said previously, I saw the word fundamental as meaning something. And, when I and my buddies, strapped on F-18s and went into combat in the first Persian Gulf War, it was those values that, we were taking abroad, that we were projecting, as in the military, our job was to defend those rights and to project them abroad. And that's what I was thinking I was projecting. But after a couple of years of looking at the situation in Canada and seeing just how the mealy-mouthed words that courts and judges use to work their way around these fundamental rights and justify balancing them off with the social considerations of the day, it's the living tree approach is taken hold. And as a matter of fact, I guess that took hold a few years after the charter was patriated in 1982. Within a couple of years, I think Justices Lamer and Wilson came out and said, we have no intention of following any intentions of the charter, which must drive Brian Peckford crazy.
Oh, it does. Yes.
We have no intention of listening to that. We believe that the living tree approach should apply and that social considerations of the day should weigh in against these fundamental rights. So, yeah, I'm looking. That's why this Alberta proposition has really got me interested. If I can, I'd like to share a screen, and I want to show the folks your 13 principles as they were laid out in the, I think it was
Great.
C2C Journal.
Right.
There we go. We're sharing a screen there. The C2C Journal. This is your 13 principles. And principle number 1 and 2. Force and threats of force prohibited, and using force to enforce the rule against force.
There's a lot of forces in there, yes, but yes.
There's a lot of forces. You're doing a lot of forcing around there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Could you? I think you've already covered it a bit, but could you a little bit more detail on?
Right.
Use of force is prohibited, so the government can't use any force, coercion, or anything to make you do anything.
Right. So, in order to get there, let's ask this question. You know, a lot of Albertans, as you alluded to, want to live in a free country. And Canada has become not that. But so what do we mean by that? What do we mean by a free country? If you are free, what does that mean? And for my money, the answer is, if you are free, that means you are not subject to the coercion of other people. That is, you are not subject to their force or threats of force to do things that you don't want to do, right?
Yep.
People can't attack you. People can't threaten you. People can't take your stuff. And it has a whole broader meaning than that. But let's just go with that for a minute. That means that if this is a constitution for a free country, that's got to be the first rule, because that's what it means, right? That means no one can use force against anybody else. And that includes the state. Now, we're immediately into a situation where we need 2 exceptions, right? The first one is, if somebody attacks you with force, well, then, of course, you're allowed to use force in response to defend yourself, right?
Yeah.
That, in that case, all bets are off, and you are allowed to do whatever you have to do to defend yourself. Number 2 is, if the no force rule is actually a law, which the Constitution says that it is, laws need to be enforced to be real, right? And therefore, the exception is the state can use force to enforce this rule that prohibits force. And that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. In order for a law to be a law, you've got to enforce it with force. That's why the state has its power. Okay? So you have this basic proposition, and the moment that somebody uses force against another fellow citizen, attacks them, steals their stuff, threatens them with violence, then the police and the courts can step in and say, no, there's a rule that says you can't do that. Otherwise, though, the state has no ability to use force against its own citizens. That means the state has no jurisdiction to make other kinds of laws about other kinds of things. You know, you take a trivial example. Often trivial examples are the best examples. There's no ability for a government to say, you know, when you go riding your bicycle, we have a policy that you must wear a helmet. Okay? Sorry, no jurisdiction. You can't do that. It's not possible constitutionally for a government to make that rule. You ride your bike, you make your own choice about what to wear, period. And so on and so forth about the myriad policies and laws and regulations that governments make about all kinds of things. Most of those now are beyond its power to make, because every law is enforced with force. And if you can't use force, then most laws don't exist.
Yeah, we've certainly seen the use of force by the government during the COVID period, and I'm thinking about our mutual friend Greg Hill. Used to fly Air Canada with him. He's still there, but he was coerced to take the vaccine.
Yes,
and he is one of those individuals that had the strength of character and the principled character to say no. And there you go. He had to leave his job. He was basically abandoned by his union. I don't know if he went off and he had to do roofing or something, you know, to put food on the table for his family. But what a state of affairs that kind of coercion is. So
yes, and COVID was, you know, it was so bad in so many ways. But if there's any silver lining, COVID was one of those moments where you found out where you stood with respect to the way your country worked, with respect to the way institutions operated, and with respect to your, you know, with your fellow citizens. And COVID was actually a kind of a test for a lot of us. And some people like Greg passed with flying colors, and a lot of other people completely failed, including a lot of people in situations of authority, both literal and intellectual and moral authority. A lot of our people and institutions completely failed that test. And COVID is one of those scenarios which provides a good test question, as in, okay, this new situation that we're trying to create in Alberta. One of the questions I like to ask is, all right, will the COVID regime be possible in the future Alberta we're setting up? If the answer is, well, yes, well, then you haven't got the right scenario yet.
Yeah, the formula's not there yet. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
No, you talk about cowardice, and we're at the highest levels when people cave in on behalf of their constituents to do harm to their constituents. I think the case I'm looking at right now is a rape gang situation in England, where Rupert Lowe has come out with a report, 214 pages, absolutely devastating. The level of cowardice that was displayed by authorities to allow young white teenage girls to be abused so terribly. So, yeah, this is a time of parsing. I guess you could say this is a time of parsing, of sorting the wheat from the chaff. Is basically what's going on. Right. I know we got a time constraint here, Bruce. And before we go, I want to do another share, because I want to familiarize our audience with the other portions of your 13 articles.
Right.
We've talked about force. We've talked about the meaning of force and how it applies, that as you so eloquently displayed or told us. Citizens subject to no other laws, flipping the default, going from positive to negative freedom. That's a huge one right there. And then we go on to items like, I like this one, term limits. No more judges ruling until they're 75 years old ad infinitum after being appointed by a Liberal Prime Minister. I like that one. And then we talk about states' elections. Now you get into the electoral setup of an executive and a Senate, and basically very much along the lines of the American situation, with the president, vice president, Senate, and House for legislating. And then disempowering judges. I love that one. And I think we're coming to the end of the 13. Only human beings are legal persons. So this kind of takes the advantages that corporations have over individuals, by making them non-persons, basically. So individuals have human rights, whereas corporations do not. That's very interesting, Kat. I'm wishing you all the best on this. Where are your 13 articles in Alberta now? Are they with the Alberta Separation Project? Are they?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I've had really very interesting discussions with a whole lot of people who are sort of at the forefront of the Alberta independence movement. I mean, there are other competing models as well. In fact, I'm going to Alberta next week to talk to to do events along with two authors of other models, and we're just going to have town halls, and people are going to ask questions and make suggestions and so on. So it's a really interesting process. My concern about the other competing models, is as very well done as they are, is that I think that under both those models, a return of the COVID regime is possible. And and the premise of the existing system, that is that the governments have the mandate and the power to provide for the general welfare by putting aside individual interests, still exists in those other models. And so, yes, it is true that the model that I've described here is radical in the sense that it's fundamentally different from the one that we have. And so people who don't want change are going to shy away from it. But on the other hand, that's the whole point. The whole point of this enterprise is that the situation that you're in will not do. And in order to actually change it, we have to think differently about how we are governed.
The status quo is well on its way down the path to serfdom. I believe it has to change, and I think you're absolutely right. And I like your marker. Will COVID happen again with this particular constitution. That is a good break point to make sure it's satisfied. Before we go, is there anything our audience can do to help or keep in touch or that you can think of?
Right. Well, thank you for the question. Listen, if they want to follow me, that'd be great. I'm on Twitter at Pardy Bruce. We have a Rights Probe website that contains all of our work. It's at rightsprobe.org. And if they want to follow me in my Substack for free, it's I have a brucepardy.substack.com. Any of those places would be terrific.
I got a feeling that a lot of the audience will be very, very interested in doing just that. And once again, I'd like to thank you very much. It's been an honor, Bruce. I fully intend on following your work. Hopefully, maybe we can get together again in the future to discuss things as they progress.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an honor and a pleasure for me, Russ. So thank you very much.
Okay, Bruce. Talk to you later.